Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our conversation on the investment bet Detroit. I'm going to start with Roger Ehrenberg here to my left. Roger, could you give us a quick overview of your Detroit and Michigan story and how you got investing in housing with Greatwater Opportunity Capital?
Sure. It is wonderful to be here, folks. Wonderful to be back. So I was born in Detroit, but didn't grow up here. My dad was a Ford exec, but we moved away. But I have always had this tie to the city. And as I went to University of Michigan, spent more and more time in the area, eventually became a venture capitalist and started to look at things through a scientific lens, it kind of occurred to me that this thing called climate change was going to really affect migration patterns. And together with my passion for Detroit, I developed this thesis around climate migration and how Detroit was going to be a huge beneficiary of that, and that it was going to take time, but that this was the time to invest, and this was the time to sink down roots. So to that end, myself and three other expats started Greatwater Opportunity Capital 7 years ago, which is now one of the largest multifamily homeowners in Detroit, all affordable workforce housing between 60 and 90% of AMI. We also started a homes business, I think. Some of you actually saw some of the homes that we built in the East Village, energy efficient, affordable, programming an entire new neighborhood. That's one side of the equation. Then there's, okay, if you build wonderful housing for people to live in that's affordable, what can they do in this great city? So myself and one of my Greatwater partners, John Updike, started a hospitality business where we backed this fantastic restaurateur, Ping Ho, who founded Marrow. We're now partners with her in Marrow and the Royce. We also started a meat business called Marrow Detroit Provisions. But then we thought, okay, well, there's more, which is, John was a very successful tech founder. I was a tech VC for many years. We want to help create great jobs where young people want to live, work, play, and stay and raise their families in Detroit. So we just recently announced we started a CPG-focused incubator and accelerator called Brand Detroit. The Marrow Detroit Provisions meat business is part of that. The beverage brand Casamara is part of that. And we're building a whole team to help support CPG companies born and bred here, but to go national. And so, exciting times for Detroit now and in the future.
Sounds like as an introduction, you see some investment opportunities here in Detroit, Roger.
Just a few.
Lindsey, you're an expat as well, or a boomerang, I guess, as we say. Could you share your story and how you came back to Dan Gilbert's Detroit Venture Capital?
Yes, thank you very much. Great to be here. My first homecoming. My move back was a little more unintentional, but no less fantastic. So I grew up about 45 minutes north of Detroit in Shelby Township, Michigan. Went to U of M, go blue, and I actually didn't ever plan on living in Metro Detroit again. It just, when I was thinking about what I wanted to do with my life, Chicago was first and foremost what was drawing me there. So I moved to Chicago, was there for nearly 10 years, and kind of tripped into the startup ecosystem. I'm not even sure I knew what a startup meant other than an early stage company when I joined on the founding team of actually another Michigan expat, a company called Trunk Club. The founder, Brian Spaley, is from Ann Arbor, and I joined the founding team of his company and was there for 8 years. So was in Chicago leading sales and eventually market growth, moved down to Dallas with that company. And then when I left, the reason for the boomerang is I had 2-year-old twins and a newborn at the time, and we were very far away from family. And so ended up moving back. I live in Ann Arbor today. But I actually didn't start working and contributing in Detroit immediately. It just wasn't on my radar screen. It wasn't the reason for the move back. And so for a couple more years, I worked for a company out of Fort Wayne. I worked for a company out of LA. I worked for a company out of Chicago. I was doing remote work before remote work was a thing. But the whole time, I was starting to get connected to the ecosystem here of investing and entrepreneurialism in Detroit and Metro Detroit. And I was watching it from the cheap seats a bit, But it was incredible just to see the growth even in those couple of years from 2018 to 2021 until I had the opportunity to officially contribute and play for the home team here in Detroit and join Dan Gilbert's family office. I'm part of Detroit Venture Partners. For those of you who don't know, we do all the early stage investing, so kind of seed Series A for Dan's family office. And a huge portion of that is investing in companies in Detroit. So over the last 10 years, and a good chunk of this predates me, but I'm excited to be a part of it now, we have invested over $100 million into over 50 Metro Detroit startups that has brought another $1.5 billion in follow-on capital back to Detroit. And it feels like we are at an incredible inflection point to keep running and doing more.
Great, yeah, we'll talk about that more of that in a minute. Trevor, now you're not originally from Michigan. You've been here about 2 decades or so. Share with us what you think Michigan needs to do to attract and retain more talent.
Yeah, well, first, good morning, everybody. As I think about the question, how many people went to the draft when it was here? Just show of hands. We got to do more cool events like the draft. I was down here with both of my sons. The energy inside of the city since the draft has just been amazing. I started my career in the District of Columbia in 1986, and when I look at Detroit today, it reminds me of the district around 1992, 1993, because you just felt this energy. VC money was starting to flow in. We've got to find a way to continue to help startup firms really find their footing. We've got to continue to build great housing. We've got to have great events like the draft to bring young people downtown and continue to start this ecosystem that you're talking about. Like that's the way you're gonna change the city, but you can absolutely feel it changing right now.
Great, thank you. Roger, you mentioned climate migration. Can you just share with us a little bit more how you developed that thesis and what's the ROI on that thesis?
Sure. So, I mean, there's been tons of papers, written on extreme climate change and how it's really affecting our coasts. And the thing about Detroit is that it has proximity to 20% of the world's fresh water. It has proximity to some of the world's greatest academic institutions, some of the world's best medical centers, and it has relatively inexpensive real estate. And at the same time, it has this incredible legacy and infrastructure that, of course, was built for 2 million people and is now effectively serving 640,000 people. And so I think Mayor Duggan said it, really well, that this the kind of unlocking the potential of Detroit has to happen in kind of concentrated chunks, neighborhood by neighborhood, area by area. And I think this, again, having been a tech VC and Rita, and actually my 2 partners are both scientists, so climate change is something that we talked about very, very frequently as part of our investment thesis. And then when I was making the transition from tech VC to really just kind of having the time and the bandwidth to follow my passions, being able to execute that knowledge and that view in a place that was both so important to me and a place that I thought represented kind of multi-generational opportunity was just such a compelling value prop.
Great, thank you. Lindsey, how does Detroit factor into investment decisions at DVP? Are you looking for companies that are based in Detroit or looking to move their operations here? And can you share what some of the more significant investment successes have been so far?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the way that we think about investing is where we bring true value to the cap table and have potential to positively impact the outcome. And that's not all regionally focused, but a huge piece of it is. Again, more than half of the investments we've made over the last decade are companies with a presence here in Detroit. Now, I think we're very much in a hybrid first, state, since the pandemic, and that's fine. I think that's great to have people contributing to companies that are here in Detroit, but we really look for founders that are building here. And it's Detroit. It's Metro Detroit. I was in Grand Rapids 2 days ago for Grand Rapids Tech Week, and I think there's just so much opportunity here in Michigan. And we've made a lot of great bets. Again, I mentioned we put $100 million into 50 companies over the last 10 years. The last 20 investments we've made here in Metro Detroit, half of those founders have been Black or female, and I think that's something very important to us too, that we are continuing to diversify the landscape of venture capital, who's investing, who they're investing in, how they're building their teams. And there's a lot of very successful companies that we have here. We have the pleasure, we're in the Madison building over across from Detroit Opera House. And then we have 2 floors there, and we actually have half a dozen of our portfolio companies that office with us that are solving really interesting problems. We have Signal Advisors, one of our growth stage companies that is selling into tools into services into wealth advisors. We have Rivet, which is revolutionizing technology within the construction industry. We have Covertree. It's an insurtech focused on manufactured housing, so in providing insurance for manufactured and mobile homes. And the list goes on. I was recently in a board meeting for one of our companies here, Livegistics, and I think we'll hear from one of their founders, Justin Turk, later today. And some of these are unsexy industries, but I think we get really excited about innovation in some of the spaces where not everybody is skating to the puck. What they're doing is helping go from pen and paper to technology for waste production, transportation, and processing. So the list goes on. I don't want to leave any companies out, and I'm happy to talk more about the investments we've made here, especially to those of you guys deploying capital, because we need more capital flowing into Detroit, and we've raised our hand, but it's going to take more than a handful of people, and then bringing more talent back here to fill those jobs.
Great, thank you. Now, of course, the main theme of Homecoming is Detroit 2050, and as we look toward the future, we see the development of EVs, electric vehicles, AI, and as you talk about the climate in the future. Well, for you, Trevor, a lot of that is going to put energy strain and demand on companies like DTE. What is DTE doing to prepare for those demands of the future?
Yeah, there's a ton of things that we're doing in the middle of it right now. To give you a scale, we have $10 billion of renewable development under construction right now in the state of Michigan, employing thousands of small companies and people here in the state. Our goal is to take that supply chain and figure out how we take these same innovative businesses and pull them in. When you think about what's happening in the energy industry right now, it was designed to flow power one way. We built big power stations and it went to the customers. A lot of people want to flow power bidirectionally right now. And my analogy, it's like taking your heart from your chest and sticking it in your leg and making sure it still works. Like it wasn't designed to work that way. So we need really smart entrepreneurs to help us figure out how you change this. It isn't here in Detroit, it's everywhere in our country. We're trying to revolutionize how our systems work. And it's coming really fast because there's a lot of really smart people out there that are trying to figure out really smart things. We need a lot of help in our industry. So I think it's not only partnering with the EV manufacturers, the grid services companies, but then thinking about how we help them find scale in a business like ours, because we're not the company that's going to come up with the technology. We're the ones that are going to deploy it at scale to try to make everything work. But I don't want to be the first one with my heart in my leg.
Yeah, that's a visual that I'm having in my head all day today. This is for all three of you. What is your assessment of the current environment for investment opportunities in Detroit? And I know, Roger and Lindsey, you both have an array of sectors, but are there particular sectors that you see most primed for growth?
All right, I'll start. Yes, but. So I'll maybe take the contrarian answer here. I think anything can be built here in Detroit, right? Like I mentioned a handful of different companies doing really cool things with really strong founders just in our portfolio, and there's 1,500 active startups across Metro Detroit right now, and we're not invested in all of them, so there's lots of people out there solving really cool problems. There's also some, a couple of big unicorns that have been built here that are on, opposite sides of the coin. You have Duo Security in Ann Arbor, and I've seen some really slick sneakers around the room, so I think a lot of you guys are aware of StockX. So I'll say that I genuinely think anything can be built here, and I want to get my stats straight, but a few things that maybe you guys have heard over the course of Homecoming so far, but I just think are pretty staggering as to why now to invest in Detroit. So, and this is just in the 3 years since I've been with DVP, because before then, I can talk about it, but I wasn't actually living it. So in 2021, a report from Entry Point said 24 local startups raised more than $316 million in venture capital, which is 5 times more than the year before. In 22, startup Genome named Detroit the #1 emerging startup ecosystem in the world. like world, not just in Michigan, not just in, the United States, but in the world. In 23, PitchBook said Detroit was second among startup ecosystems behind Dubai. And then I thought this was kind of cool too. So far this year, this is a specific company that I'll call out as well. It's an investment of DVPs. But this year, Forbes did a ranking of America's best startup employers, and Our Next Energy here in Novi was actually ranked #1. So again, I just think anything can be built here if we have the right talent, if we have the right tenacity, and if we have capital flowing. And we're at this inflection point where I think the time is not to slow, it is to sprint.
How about you, Roger? What sectors do you think are primed for growth?
So, firstly, I deeply agree with your answer. I think, I mean, the talent quotient here is just so high. Anything can be built here. To me, it's more the enablement. What is the environment that we can create that makes people want to come and want to build and stay here? And so, we've taken this approach of, okay, well, first you need great places for people to live that are affordable, and that there's a great opportunity to live a life that you couldn't conceive of on the coast because of cost to live. But then there's, well, many people want to have families. So we need great schools, and we need great schools within the city's borders. And so this is going a little off piece, but I guess Santa might talk about it later when he talks, but Marygrove and the experiment that's going on there with P through 20 education and within the city's borders, where more than 90% of the students there are from within 1 mile of the school from a relatively underprivileged community, and the kids' test scores are skyrocketing and winning robotics competitions and chess competitions as a STEM and social-based curriculum. I'm just saying we need to run these experiments so we can both bring people here to build with all the great capabilities we have, but also to be able to raise families and not flee to the suburbs or flee to the coasts.
Do you want to grab that one, Trevor, too?
Yeah, I will grab it. So in our industry, I go to clean tech. When you think about where the money's flowing into clean tech, it's energy storage. Like the holy grail of renewables and clean energy is trying to figure out storage. When you think about what the auto company is doing here, there's a real confluence between battery technology, you mentioned one, and what we need to do on the grid. Like we're storing power for 4 hours today. That doesn't do it. We need to store it for 4 weeks. Like trying to figure out this equation is where all the money's flowing in clean tech right now. I talked a little bit about grid services, but there's a huge opportunity for entrepreneurs, specifically in Detroit, to try to dig into this. And there's some really cool things happening inside of our area in that area. But there's a ton of money out there right now trying to figure this problem out.
Great. Another one for the group. What are Detroit's unique advantages, and what are its challenges, and where can Detroit improve when it comes to creating a climate for investment?
Yeah, I think the advantage is the infrastructure and the disadvantage is the infrastructure, right? Because we have a city that's been built twice, right? You had 2 million people in the city of Detroit, and then half of them or 2/3 of them moved to the suburbs. So you've got a city with huge infrastructure, but it's aged infrastructure. The advantage is, how do you go ahead and reinvigorate that infrastructure, like what Roger's trying to do inside of the city to repopulate the city? Look, as Detroit goes, Michigan is going to go. I think there's no question about, as we think about the state, its success is hinged on Detroit being successful. So infrastructure is a huge opportunity for us, but it's also a legacy issue that we need to work our way through.
Yeah, what I would say specifically, I'll speak to venture investment and backing, early stage entrepreneurs. What I've experienced through, being here and working inside of companies and in other cities is, I think we do a pretty good job of supporting founders, once they kind of get to the product and market, the car is starting to roll down the street. But for somebody to get there who doesn't just have access to friends and family capital and can't bootstrap their way there, I think we need more people taking the risk, individuals willing to write checks and support founders at those earliest stages. And then I think Detroit's hot right now. Again, I feel this like energy in the city since the draft. And listen, it was a flame that was burning, before then, but it just feels like every other day I'm being bombarded with more great attention coming to Detroit. And so if we can get these founders building and growing, I think, for all of you guys in the room, assuming most folks are, not living here and are going to go back to your respective cities, I think it's not only those of us who are here, focusing on those early stage investments, but it's the ability to bring more awareness and more capital from outside of Michigan back for those A rounds and B rounds so these companies can really flourish. So it's not just incumbent on a small group of local, venture investors to get these companies from A to Z.
Thank you, Lindsey. Roger?
So there's no question that the raw materials are here. Again, if you just look at the academic institutions and the research budgets of the colleges and universities here and the medical centers, we have all the talent we could possibly want to innovate and develop new bleeding edge ideas. Totally agree with Lindsey about the notion of bringing more capital here. There's one very specific aspect that I think is missing, and that's density of super successful founders that are angel investing back into the ecosystem and mentoring. That's something that Silicon Valley has. That's something that New York has. Detroit just doesn't have that critical mass yet. So I think for people that have ties to Detroit that have been successful, to reinvest back in the community and to mentor is something that, again, I'll call out. So I think Silicon Valley has done uniquely well, and things like YC have been great catalysts for organizing those networks. But and then I think the last thing I would say, it's about stickiness. It's, yes, great innovation can happen here, but great innovation needs to stay here and be built here, which again gets back to these platform issues. And I don't mean platforms like an incubator platform, platforms like the city being a favorable place to do business, to be able to easily, without a lot of red tape, start up businesses, to be able to build housing inexpensively without a lot of red tape, reducing the friction to the kind of growth that I think we all on the stage see as inevitable if we just kind of give it a little bit of a push.
Have you, in your house building venture so far, have you experienced a lot of red tape or more than you expected going into it?
I see we have 6 minutes and 32 seconds left, so I will give a very abbreviated answer. The answer is things things have gotten better, but they could be a lot better. Okay. And just in terms of the speed for our ability to build an energy efficient single family home, which by the way, we're doing in conjunction with the community who we plan this all hand in glove with. So it's not this gentrification, people from the outside parachuting in. We are doing what the community very much desperately wants. It's infill of a great neighborhood that once existed, where parts of it exist and it will exist again, but it's really hard. Things like alleys, things like roads, things that have been neglected that basically at this point are our responsibility, which really shouldn't be our responsibility, and everything we're doing is with private capital. So when we think about reprogramming these neighborhoods and building parks and having a library and maybe a community center, things for the community, these are the areas where, the city and foundations could be incredibly helpful in our mission to, within the next handful of years, build 250 new homes to fill in this neighborhood.
Got it, yeah. We have a room full of folks who could be potential investors in Detroit. Perhaps they're not from here. What advice would you give to someone who is from, elsewhere, but is interested in investing in Detroit? And where would they start?
My email address is no. In all seriousness, I think coming back to events like this are great. You're going to be hearing from investors, you're going to be hearing from community leaders, you're going to be hearing from public figures, you're also going to be hearing from founders today. I think it's just, educating yourself on what's happening here, coming back regularly for maybe more than just Michigan football games, and just really leaning in and finding areas where you can help. And I think it's also, I alluded to this earlier, but spreading the word in your communities as well about what's happening here. We talk about capital. I'd be remiss to not also hit once again on the talent side of things. because, I think we do a decent job with like, getting people to boomerang back here, but it often is for personal reasons, right? Like I have kids, I need help, or I am a kid who needs to come back and help my parents, and then you sort of find your way back into the Detroit startup ecosystem. I think we can do a little bit better job of retaining talent. We have a fellowship program that we run every summer, and this past summer it was so exciting. We had 6 students in it from 5 universities, so Michigan, Stanford, Georgia State, Indiana, and Oakland University, but all of them were from Metro Detroit, and all of them want to, contribute here in Detroit, and that's something we look at. Obviously, like, their entrepreneurial prowess, their resume, having a level of diversity in the class, but also like, do you want to work in Detroit and contribute to this ecosystem? And then, but one thing that I think we need to do better at is you don't just have to have a tie to Michigan to move to Michigan and work in Michigan and invest in Michigan. I got so excited. I was in Grand Rapids, I mentioned a couple days ago for Grand Rapids Tech Week, and I met a woman who was born in DC, lived in Chicago for the last decade, and moved here because she heard about a really cool opportunity at a Michigan-based startup. And that's the kind of stuff too that I think it's not only like the dollars, but like it's the investment in time and talent. And so I promise to do a really good job of sharing with you guys like what companies are building here, what roles they have to fill. But I think getting outsiders to understand what great stuff is happening in your hometown is important as well.
Yeah, the idea of getting folks to move here who don't already have a tie is intriguing.
That's the next step.
Yeah.
Well,
Trevor?
I was just going to say we need talent to come in, and we need to hold the talent that's here. So one of the things that Roger touched on is we have great universities inside of the state, but we're losing a lot of talent. We're 49th out of 50 with outflow of talent inside of the state. We've got to reverse that. The opportunity inside of Detroit is enormous for investors right now. And you've got a lot of large companies that are willing to help and dive in and help investors come in and make themselves successful. It may feel harder than it does in Silicon Valley or in New York, but it doesn't mean that you can't be hugely successful inside of Detroit right now. You've got to just lean your shoulder into it. And there's a lot of great companies and a lot of great resources are going to try to make you successful if you're willing to put your shoulder into it and come to Detroit.
Roger, advice for potential investors? You get the last word.
Come and visit. The energy is palpable. It is an exciting time to be part of this ecosystem. I think it's very embracing, which I will tell you is not the case in many other ecosystems. I think there is this notion that we're all in this together and that one company's success, one individual success is part of collective success. And it's funny just hearing the stories of, people that aren't from here coming and doing great things. I have to call out my partner, Ping Ho, the founder of Marrow, because Ping was born in Singapore, was in the music business in New York, came and visited Detroit 8 years ago, set down roots, started, arguably one of the best restaurants in Detroit with a world famous chef, opened 2 other awesome places, started a meat business, expanding in Eastern Market. It's just, that to me is a great story and the kind of story we want to hear again and again and again. It's kind of like an inside out where we've got all this great talent and we want them to stay and innovate. But then at the same time, outside in, we want to bring awesome people with energy and ideas to come join us and to help seed the future as well.
That's fantastic, and we have a packed morning for you, and so we're going to say thank you to our panel and have the next set of folks come up. Thank you for a wonderful conversation.